and welcome back to another episode of the Edtech Podcast, where we seek to improve the dialogue between ed and tech for better innovation and impact. This week I've been having some really great catch-up chats with some familiar and new faces, chatting from everything about supercomputers, deep learning and the promise of remote working. So if that's you, it's been great to catch up, and I even managed as well to catch up on a few minutes of drum practice this week. So watch your back, Taylor Hawkins. Now, though, before we start, a few updates from the world of ed and tech this week. Now, you may have heard this video from Dominic Traynor.
I want school to open up their minds to new potential futures. A huge trend we've seen recently is the rise of mind-blowingly creative online courses by world-class experts, and I want my children to be a part of that. I want your child to design and build their own machines with a NASA engineer. There's an online course for that, but they'll need tools, materials, space and supervision. Want your child to master the art of branding with design industry pros? There's an online course for that, but they'll need access to software and good computer hardware. Want to learn about power and responsibility from superheroes and comic books? There's an online course for that from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. All we need to do now is design some kind of revolutionary large building with good IT facilities and rooms to collaborate, that can buy materials or software in bulk, where they can be fed and spend free time with friends, supported by adults trained in the art of teaching, where they can take part in sports, music, drama and dance. We're thinking about a flipping school, aren't we?
So a bit of a rallying cry for sort of making the most of the hours that we have in school and developing key creative and digital skills from Dominic Traynor, who you may know previously from Lit Film Fest and who's now the education evangelist for EMEA at Adobe. So anyway, with that creative vision in mind, here are a few cool things for schools and students to get involved in. So first up, going back to Dominic, he has put together www.gomakecreate.com, which is a free short film making challenge from Adobe and Netflix. And I've already made the storyboard for an adventure film with my 6-year-old. And if you're looking for something fun, creative and digital to do with your kids, do go and check that out. We've had a lot of fun and giggles putting together our quest for gold bars, so lots of fun there. Next up, for students aged 13 to 16, there is the 12th edition of Design Ventura, the Design Museum's national design competition, which invites teams of children to design a product with the winning design being sold in the Design Museum shop, which is pretty cool. This year the competition has collaborated with sound artist and designer Yuri Suzuki as the brief setter, and you can check out the brief and how to enter on our website. So if you go to the show notes for the edtechpodcast.com/podcast, check out the latest episodes and all these links will be put up there. And for younger kids in years 7 to 8, there's also the Waste Age Mini Challenge, which offers a taster of the Design Ventura programme for younger audiences. And finally, for anyone who listened to our past episode with music and tech genius Imogen Heap, you'll be interested to know that Open UK, the London-based advocacy organisation for open technology in the UK, has launched the second edition of the Free Kids Digital Skills Camp. And they're giving away 5,000 free digital glove kits. So the initiative's goal is to boost UK kids' digital and coding skills and to raise awareness of the importance of coding, sustainability and open source education among primary and secondary school children. And you can find out more by searching Open UK and Open Kids Camp. Right, now on to some cool things for startups listening in to get involved in. So first up, funding and competitions. Innovate UK, as part of UK Research and Innovation, is offering the chance to receive a £50,000 grant and a bespoke package of mentoring, coaching and business support. So go and check out what they're up to. Reimagine Education is back and calling for groundbreaking innovations in education to submit to their judges and to win up to $50,000 in funding. And there are only a few weeks left to apply for that. The Edtech Digest Edtech Awards are still open for entries, so go and check out what they're up to. The guys over at StoryCube have a last few places open for their free sales and storytelling workshops for edtech companies, which is delivered in collaboration with JISC, and previous cohort members include Handshake, Sam Labs, Hard, Wario, Kiddie Science, Bibliu, Springpod and CodeGrade, and the next sprint is from the 28th of September to the 15th of October, so you need to get in touch quick if you're listening to this fresh off the press. Female EdTech geniuses should check out the Women in Innovation Awards 2021-22, which opens this month. And last but not least, Tech Nation's Rising Stars is open in the UK and applications close on the 20th of October. Phew! And events. So there's some events gearing up over the next weeks and months. There is Educator Investor in London in October, UFI VocTech Trust's Week of VocTech in November, and Reimagine Education in December. And the Edtech Podcast is involved across some of those variously, so keep your eyes peeled and hope to see some people either online or in person, which is all very exciting. So on to this week's episode, which is a refreshing and exciting chat about all things audio and learning. Thanks so much to my guests who shared so much brilliant information in this episode, and I hope you enjoy. It's not very hard for me to get excited about audio and podcasts, so here we go.
Now let's talk about Apple Podcasts. As you know, Apple helped launch the podcast industry 15 years ago.
We were talking before about how old audio learning is. I'm actually going to go 2,000, 3,000 years back, pre the printing press, when the spoken word and audio was the main format for education.
When looking specifically at spoken word's share of audio listening has increased by 30% over the last 6 years.
A big deal this week, another Spotify podcasting acquisition.
We're also introducing Apple Podcast subscriptions, which enables you to unlock new content as well as additional benefits like ad-free listening, early access, and much more.
So, yeah, really excited to be back with our next episode. How this episode really started is, I guess in the summer of this year, 2021, I kind of put together a few thoughts on LinkedIn around audio and learning. And I think the article was titled Podcast as a Learning Tool. And that seemed to garner quite a bit of interest. So I think there were sort of 420 views and 10 comments, and people started going back and forth on it. And that has really evolved into this episode on audio and learning. So for listeners who didn't have the chance to check out that article, a quick summary. Firstly, looking at the history of audio and learning, that, this isn't a new thing, that, many of the language learning things we grew up with were perhaps, cassettes that you would listen into, or even the Open University and some of the long distance learning being based around audio and the audio medium. And then the idea that, the pandemic has sort of accelerated the need to learn in different ways, and audio being one of those, and indeed 900,000 podcasts being launched in 2020 alone. And many of those podcasts were to assist in learning, so whether that's revision for your medical exams or learning as entertainment. And even pre-pandemic, some of the big tech companies like Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and even the BBC are sort of going all out with acquisitions to try and put them in the top spot for audio content, including, again, audio for learning. So this episode really is, what can we expect next for audio for learning, and how will this serve education institutions, edtech organisations, and more importantly, the learners themselves? With me to talk about all of this are Sophie Bolzer, the founder and CEO of Advice, Based in Austria, Advice is an audio-based software solution for companies that helps them to capture and spread real know-how. Of the biggest myth in education, she says that schools and universities are the ones driving innovation in the edtech sector, when in fact it's almost always companies or end consumers. Of her recommended resource, she loves listening to the SaaSter podcast, which provides lots of hands-on insight from successful SaaS founders. And she is personally inspired by Go Student, which is Austria's second unicorn this year. Sophie is a fighter, having come back from a terrible ski accident where she was laid up in bed, to run her own business and make the most of dead time to study with Advice. So welcome, Sophie.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have Nigel Smith, Head of Learning at Apolitical. Apolitical's big idea is that governments are critical to solving global challenges, but public servants lack access to the best skills and solutions. So he says, we're bringing 21st century learning to public servants around the world to make government smarter to solve the world's hardest challenges. Of the biggest myth in education, he says that online learning is inherently inferior to face-to-face. Nigel is a stalwart in audio and learning, having worked previously as the digital editor at both BBC Radio 5 Live and Radio 4, and also as the director of content at FutureLearn, where he grew his team from 4 people to more than 30. He's no stranger to controversy, having closed down the message board for the BBC Radio 4 show The Archers, and subsequently receiving hate mail, which I find truly astonishing. And so I'm very sorry that you went through that. Personally, hard time, Nigel. We can talk about that later. His personal hero is Diana Laurillard at UCL, whose conversational framework informed a lot of FutureLearn's approach to social learning. And a moment he has been most scared of is clinging to the edge of Isle of Skye's Cuillin Ridge. So welcome, Nigel.
Great to be here.
Next up, we've got Ben Schumann-Stoler, the Director of Content for Shortcast at Blinkist. Ben has helped launch audio formats since 2014 to inspire people to fit learning into their lives. The newest one is called Shortcast, where he works with well-known and up-and-coming podcast creators to present and highlight the key learnings of a podcast episode through a specially designed audio format lasting 15 minutes or less. Ben was born in Chicago, USA, before moving to Berlin, where he currently works. His favourite podcast is the Really Long History podcast series, which covers things like the history of Rome, Age of Napoleon, and the decline of civilization. And of the biggest myth in education, he says that people with the most reach are the most knowledgeable or credible. So hear to that, and welcome, Ben. And finally, our last 2 guests. So first up, we have Megan Lazavick. Megan is a vice president at Edison Research. She crafts custom research for thought leadership and content marketing and specialises in the creative presentation of data and insights. In the past year, she has created and presented the spoken word audio report from NPR and Edison Research, the Smart Audio Report Australia, and radio live on air and everywhere. Of a big myth in education, she says, we have so much information about consumers accessible through technology, and of course, people love to analyse big data. They want to see actual usage information. But I'd argue as a researcher that just looking at that information is simply not enough. There is no substitute for an in-person qualitative research study or a customised national survey to understand your target consumer against the total population. Her personal hero and resources that she highlights are the work of Gina Davis for her gender equality research. That is a great example of how to use research for good. And James Cridland, who is an excellent journalist and thought leader and who has been documenting the changes in radio and digital audio for many years. And his newsletter, Pod News, is a must-read, she says. So welcome, Megan. And last but not least, Yehoshua Zlotogorski, co-founder and CEO for Alp Audio. Alp Audio is a startup content provider created by a former VC investor. Yehoshua says, we've built Alp courses to fit into our lifestyle, whether you're on your way to school, work, washing the dishes, or going for a jog. So welcome to all the amazing guests. Let's start right at the beginning. I'd like to delve into some of the historical evolutions of audio and learning that people should know about. So I don't know, Nigel, if you want to kick that one off, and then if anyone wants to jump in with their own kind of views on this, that would be great.
Yeah, well, as you said at the beginning, Sophie, audio in learning is nothing new. The BBC, well, what was the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company before it became nationalised, they broadcast their first radio directly to schools back in 1924. So, that's evidence. One of my favorite examples is the School of the Air in Australia, which is how learning was delivered to people living in the outback. And children would come to these buildings, these schools, where they would listen to broadcasts on shortwave radios, and the learning materials, the additional materials that they would read, would be delivered by the flying doctors. Now, I think what's really interesting there with Australia, because in my experience, certainly at FutureLearn, where I worked with a lot of really forward-thinking Australian universities, I've always found, Australia actually is been one of the great pioneers in distance learning and online learning and edtech. And I think, one of the reasons for that is this immense geography. And, the School of the Air is a fantastic example that has been doing that for years and has evolved. And as you said, Open University, I actually looked on eBay yesterday. You can buy secondhand Open University cassettes should you wish to buy, Shakespeare works or language learning. So yeah, it's a long and storied history for sure.
Can I throw something in? There's a great book called The Untold Story of the Talking Book by Matthew Rubery that maybe some people know, and he's got this great summation of the history of audiobooks, especially, and how audio is represented text, and basically says it's always been around as long as published books. There's been an idea that people who can't read or people that don't have access to the printed book should be able to access its information. So he's got this great term of represent and overcome, which I think is something that audio is still trying to do, like represent the text, represent an idea, but overcome its limitations of being in a book or being something you have to read. So it's always been tied up with accessibility and always been tied up with technology.
Thanks so much for that, Ben. And I love the point from Nigel about it being tied up with sort of, overcoming rural challenges or challenges of accessing kind of education in a physical way. And I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of people who listen into audio content for learning, so many times you hear it's because they're commuting long distances. So that still holds true today as well. I know it's something that you mentioned, Sophie, when you came up with the idea of Audvice.
Yes, exactly. So I had the idea to Audvice when I was commuting a lot between Salzburg and Innsbruck, like my hometown and the city I studied. And at some point, there were really knockout exams coming up. So every minute literally counted to kind of really prepare. And I had a look at if there's some kind of podcasts or audiobooks out there that are somehow relevant to what I had to learn. But since I didn't find anything that was kind of relevant or affordable, I ended up doing my own voice recordings and realized that it helped me so much to remember the things better. And then when my fellow students told me they're doing the same thing, I thought it's such a pity that no one is sharing it. And today also we see, Audvice is, like you said earlier, a platform that makes it really easy for people to create, share, and listen to knowledge that comes really structured in playlists and tracks. And back then we were targeting students, but today it's used by big companies to facilitate internal onboardings, trainings, and continuous learning. And it's still today nice to see where our users actually listen to Audvice. That can be still while they're commuting, but also a lot of them said while they're doing sports, and actually two mentioned that they're listening to Audvice while they're taking the probably not most romantic bubble bath, but still a bubble bath. So this is really how I think the audio can fit so much better in your day.
I thought you were going to say something far worse than bubble bath, so I'm glad you did that. Does anyone else have any interesting ideas of where this audio content is being listened to?
Well, I just finished 2 weeks of remote one-on-one interviews for the next version of the Spoken Word Audio Report that we're releasing later this fall. So pretty much nonstop talking to people about how they listen to spoken word audio. And I pretty much heard it all. But I do think that it's it's cool that each person has like their own routine, like they have their own thing. For example, my thing is I look forward to on Saturday morning going out in my garden and working in my flower bed and listening to a podcast. That is just a thing that I look forward to, that I've worked into my routine. And that's the beautiful part of audio, is that it can fit into things that you already have to do and really enhance things that you have to do. You're doing the dishes. I hate doing the dishes, but I don't mind listening to a podcast while I'm doing the dishes. And that's what I heard from all of these people, that they really enjoyed the opportunity to learn something new while they're doing all of the other things that they have to do throughout the day. I mean, one person even said, when I have to play with my kids, and sometimes that can get repetitive and boring, you stick one earbud in one ear. And she said, then I don't mind, after a while you can only play dinosaurs so much, right? And you have something in your ear and you get a little adult stimulation as well.
It's really terrible, and I hope my mother-in-law or any others aren't listening in, but I have done that at sort of, putting to bedtime sometimes. Not with the one that's older and understands that, but maybe when little one was like really wee, when you're just like, this is going to be a long slog. So, right. And actually that was Blinkist, Ben, you'll be pleased to know. So,
of course, that's be good. Present with your children. I don't want to advocate to ignore your children. It can help.
Megan, can I ask you a follow-up?
Sure.
Because one thing that I found really interesting was how what we've seen in our research is like the commute use case and the multitasking use case at home have become, since COVID, like super nuanced. So now there's not just like at home and out of home, but now there's like, what do you mean at home? I could be doing lots of things at home. I could be really focusing on something at home, or I could be kind of listening at home, or I could be kind of doing both. And same thing with commuting. It used to be like, it's on and I'm either on the train, on the bike, or on the car. Now it's like, what do you mean commuting? You know what I mean? It seems like, and I'm just curious if in these discussions you had, if there's anything you can kind of drop before the report drops to us.
For sure, there are gray areas for people. But I think it comes down to content selection. And people were very specific about when they listened to a banter podcast and when they would listen to a very specific true crime podcast. It's funny. It's almost like the activities will pick the type of content. I personally cannot, I love spoken word audio. I cannot listen to it while I'm working. I need to concentrate. I don't have that type of job where I can sit and listen, but I'm amazed by so many people who say, I can sit at my desk and listen to a podcast. And those are the type of people who are kind of listening to a Joe Rogan or some other type of banter, long form podcast where they can sort of have it on in the background and tune in and out. They don't feel like they have to listen to the whole thing so intensely, for like, as opposed to like a true crime podcast where you want to hear everything. And if you miss something, you don't really understand what's going on.
This week, we've got a little snippet here now from Michael Shaw, who has been reading Audrey Watter's new book, Teaching Machine. So in the style of all those short form summaries that we've been talking about, check out what Michael Shaw has to say about Audrey Watter's new book, and then we'll be back on with our audio and learning.
For the last few weeks, I've been telling pretty much everyone I know in EdTech, oh, you should read Teaching Machines. It's not a book about the latest in AI or neuroscience. It's about the innovators who are trying to make classroom technology 100 years ago. Now, these were mechanical devices made out of wood and metal, but the goal behind them was uncannily similar to a lot of EdTech today, to give learners a personalized experience with questions and information at the right level. I find it fascinating how similar some of the debates and problems they faced were to modern ones. But Audrey Watter's book is also clearly meant as a warning. One of the biggest innovators featured is B.F. Skinner, an expert in behavioral conditioning of animals, who even trained pigeons to play table tennis. The book makes us think, if our technology still resembles his, are we too treating children like mice in a maze?
I'm quite interested to hear from everyone on how you see audio for learning playing out.
I think one of the things that is interesting is a lot of popular podcasts have a learning element. There's a lot of factual stuff. When you look at what the BBC does, the BBC have invested a lot in Sounds, which is their audio app, and the most popular content on there, on demand, is Radio 4 content, factual content. A lot of really popular podcasts, have this sort of, some of my favorite podcasts, things like, 99% Invisible, which is a great podcast about design and urban environment. I learn a lot from that 20 minutes. And I think what's interesting is as more people listen to kind of that content for a learning, but also there's an element of entertainment in it as well, that they are taking what they've enjoyed there, if they work in a learning environment, and thinking, okay, well, how can I put this sort of stuff into an online course? So it's certainly what we've been thinking about at Apolitical, is how do we bring elements of what people like from a podcast and present it in our unique learning experience for public servants. So I think there's going to be a mixture. I think those big companies are definitely investing in stuff that is broadly educational, but the popularity of that stuff is then influencing, what people do in more traditional learning environments.
You mentioned social learning in the beginning. So I suppose some audio for learning can be quite broadcast. It can be, here's some content, like listen in. I'm interested to sort of see whether the social element of all of this develops as well. So will we have more communities of learners off the back of some of either the podcasts or other forms of audio content?
At Apolitical, our online courses are very much based on social learning principles. We really believe that public servants can learn a great deal, from each other. They want to share their ideas. So what we have done with some of the audio content that we're developing is looked at, great contributions from learners within our courses, have then contacted those people and recorded little voice memos. So in our sort of short form 5-minute audio content, you'll hear the voices of public servants from around the world sharing their kind of take on particular ideas. So for us, it's been just quite an interesting way of kind of taking one part of the learning experience and then repositioning it in a way that we hope people will engage with. And I think that's sort of an interesting thing for us all to talk about, is just how do you fit the kind of the learning part of the audio experience into the sort of, people's kind of busy lifestyles.
I would just add that learning is one word that has a lot of different subsegments. And so learning can be anything from just osmosis, I'm listening to two people talk and whatever I absorb, all the way to intentional, solving math problems or coding where you're really hands-on. And the why we learn matters just as much, if not more, than what we're learning and the way the structured is content. And so when someone is approaching material because they have to ace an exam the next day or they have to solve something at work, their mindset is very different than listening to Joe Rogan or Invest Like the Best or Bankless Podcast or whatever you're listening to on your way to work, when sure you want to learn, but it's really also a companion for your commute or for your flower beds. And just like we have YouTube versus Coursera or Udemy or cohort-based courses today, where each format is very different, I think the audio landscape is going to shape up the same way, because podcasts would be much more similar to YouTube, where they accompany you, they're informal. The business model today is also driven in a very similar way, where advertising, engagement, repetitive podcasts and YouTubes, that's the way people monetize, versus a course model where it's really one and done. There's a curriculum, there's a syllabus, you start at A, you end at Z, you've learned something, you've changed along the way, which is very, very different from a standard podcast. And those also are driven from the business model of the large companies that you mentioned, where the standard podcast format is really built around engagement and advertising. And it contributes to a unit, as in a course where you have 10 podcasts, someone pays for those 10 podcasts. And that's really driven from, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and the way these larger players are built. So the business model also comes into how people teach. And just kind of tapping onto what Nigel was talking about at the end, which is how do we do audio learning, especially when we're doing other things? Interestingly enough, I know we were talking before about how old audio learning is. I'm actually going to go 2,000, 3,000 years back, pre the printing press, when the spoken word and audio was the main format for education. Whether you're talking about the Bible, the Quran, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, all of these were oral works. And the principles of teaching something in an auditory first way have existed for a long time. Whether it's chunking information, repetition, mnemonics, all of those aspects have really been around for a very long time. And today, if you want to teach something properly in audio, you also have to consider those elements and infuse what you're teaching with those elements, whether it's storytelling or mnemonics and repetition. Today, you can also add in all kinds of technological improvements, whether it's interactive questions and answers with audio and voice, or summaries, all kinds of things like that. But going back to the basics, for audio learning to be genuine, you have to have those things inside.
Amazing. I love that reflection on how long we're talking about here. I'd love to come back to Megan in a bit, actually, maybe we should do that now, before we go on to some of the innovations that are out there, because you did mention some of the sort of uses of technology to make the most out of audio for learning. But just before we do that, the spoken word audio report, I know you're working on one currently, so some of that may still be in motion. For our listeners, could you sort of summarise some of the main points of your most recent published report?
Sure. We partnered with NPR to conduct this research, and this coming fall will be our third iteration of the report. But the spoken word is a combination of a couple different surveys. One is from Share of Ear from Edison Research, which is this huge ongoing survey. It's a diary study where we ask Americans to fill out a diary for a 24-hour period. And they fill out their listening in 15-minute increments, and we can get so much information out of that diary, how much time they're spending with music, how much time they're spending with spoken word, and we can break that down by platform. So this huge data set gives us so much information about what and how people are listening. So we know if they're listening in the car or at home and what devices they're using. So we use some of that to track these habits over time, since Share of Ear has been going on for many years now. And we know that when looking specifically at spoken word share of audio listening has increased by 30% over the last 6 years and 8% over the past year. So the popularity of spoken word is really growing. People are spending more time with it at the expense of music. People still love their music, and music, out of the overall pie, music is getting more time spent. But spoken word is really starting to take away at music. We were also interested in that growth for the previous report. Who's listening more and why are they listening? And we noticed that spoken word audio's growth is driven by large increases among women, younger listeners, African Americans, and Latinos, at least in the US. So younger, more diverse populations. And I'm excited for this next report coming up because we decided to do an extra focus on those people. So you'll see a lot of the same ideas from the 2020 study in the spoken word audio report, but this coming year you'll get to see a little more insight on those audiences. What else? Oh, the other thing is that it's just we asked those people who were listening to spoken word audio more often, why are you spending more time listening to spoken word? And we did this by first conducting one-on-one interviews where I met with about 20 people and asked them all of the reasons, all of their motivations. And then we took those reasons, put it in a super long list and put it back into a new national survey. And then we were able to quantify those reasons, see what reasons really rise to the top. And some of them you can guess, but it's really nice when you can sort of quantify what are the most popular reasons. Convenience and multitasking were super high on the list, and those are long recognized for spoken word listening. But other strong motivators for increased listening are personal growth content, like self-help and wellness type of content. People said they're just finding better content, more relevant content for them. And that content could have been out there. They're just finally discovering it, or there's more content out there that's appealing to them. And then the final theme that came out of those interviews and in the research was spoken word's ability to improve mental health. And I'll remind you, we did this study kind of after or during the pandemic, really. And I've been doing one-on-one interviews for about 15 years. I've never had so much discussion about mental health. It is so top of mind. And it's something that people are willing to talk about now. It's a thing. We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are trying to find ways to get through it. So spoken word audio really, really helps.
I think the mental health topic is right on point there, because when we talk about learning, we're not necessarily talking about getting an MBA or philosophy 101 at a university MOOC. We could be talking about learning in the sense of, I don't feel well and I wish I felt better. Or I need help, or in the sense that whatever, my kid won't go to sleep and I need help. I have a question that I want an answer to. That's learning. And I think what audio and what podcasts have done is make it more accessible, is be able to create a space where instead of having to go enroll in a course or something in order to find out the 10 ways that positive psychology I can implement positive psychology in my life. Maybe I just search positive psychology in the App Store. In podcasts or Google it, and then maybe exactly that afternoon on the way home, I'm listening to something excellent about that. And I think this is such a positive, amazing opportunity. That's why we're all here, right? Because it's just a beautiful thing. Then when someone has access to that information, that unlocks that thing, or they feel like, I've been helped, I'm satisfied, And then when we're talking about mental health, it's actually can be life-changing or life-saving. And I just think like it's a beautiful, important moment kind of in the history of ideas,
In one of my recent interviews this past week, a woman said that listening to a podcast about mental health convinced her to finally start going to see a therapist. And it's just something she would have never considered. But it really is when listening to something can make that much change in your life and bring that much good in your life. It's really amazing.
Listening is a very intimate experience. It's a very different experience to watching a video. And typically, listening on headphones, you do feel like you develop relationships with those people who you are listening to in a way that you don't necessarily do through other mediums.
And I think you have much more time to reflect on what is said compared to video, because you can count on your own imagination, while as with a video, you're just very passively consuming everything. And with audio, that's very different. And what I also find very interesting, if you have a look at all the research that is out there on the probability when people really remember things or not. So they tend to remember things much more, of course, when they have some kind of emotional connection to it. And this is what I'm always fascinated about again and again when I listen to something. I feel so much more connected to people's voices that it's easier for me to remember it. And this is also something we found out when we were asking our users, for example, for feedback. And when you imagine that everyone in the company has a really easy life in kind of getting audio content out there about not only long-term content, but also short-term. So what is relevant in my team or in my region. then the feedback was that users felt so much more connected to the company because they were listening, just voice-based, to their supervisors who are in different countries, who they will probably never meet, but who are deciding on the strategy and on like how these people at the end of the hierarchy should execute. And they also had the opportunity to contribute what they know, even if it's just like some kind of knowledge that is relevant for their team of 5 people. And then they also said they felt so much more heard in a company. And I think this is what is the beautiful thing about audio. It kind of keeps the barrier really low for people to not only access and consume it, but also for people to create it. And I think this is the point why there is much more relevant audio content out there compared to video. That is like such a big effort in production. That you always need to make it pay off, and you always focus on content that needs to last forever. And then it's more generic and never really relevant to people.
Yeah, some absolutely fascinating points there. If we think about the future of audio for learning, I guess I was really interested in the points about the fact that you're learning in a broad sense, and it's not about learning to gain a qualification necessarily. So it can be kind of informal. It can be broader than, goals for your workplace. It can be things to do with your own personal development outside of that as well. So I just wondered whether we're going to see a sort of division of audio for learning in, sort of formal for assessment, and then sort of private. So for your organisation, Advice, is more, that example that you mentioned is relevant to that 5 people in that team, but that massively enhances their work. But it isn't something that necessarily you would host on Apple Podcasts, and so you have a private platform for that. So I'm kind of interested in the searching and distribution of this audio content for learning and how that will play out.
Yes, sure. So like you said, it's kind of an internal audio library. It's just about reaching internal audiences. I mean, you can also go and, for example, publish a playlist to share it with someone external, but the purpose is not like really getting content out there to increase your reach, but like really sharing knowledge with that. And when it comes to organizing and searching everything, so our format is based on a micro-learning approach. So in essence, it's like playlists with tracks, and we would recommend tracks to not be longer than 6 minutes. And that doesn't mean you always have to keep yourself that short. You can still say whatever you want to say, but give it a better structure and kind of split it up into tracks. And that already kind of forces the creator a bit to think more about like how they want to structure the content and make it really kind of easy to process for the listener. And then also for the listener, you can jump right to the section that is most relevant to you. You can save it, you can bookmark it, you can create like new playlists out of that. And this is how kind of the format itself has a really organized structure already. And then the search functionality is based on speech to text, so that in essence, you're not only kind of searching for the title or the description of a playlist, but also about what is really said in this audio track.
I loved Sophie's mention of the speech to text. Another study that I do is the Smart Audio Report, and just the AI is growing incredibly. It's on every single piece of technology you have in your house, or it will be very soon. It's just becoming such a big part of people's lives, whether or not they realize it. The consumer doesn't necessarily understand everything that's going on, but the computers do, and they're making predictions for people. That's just going to be a bigger and bigger part of the audio world, it getting people the content that they want. So that's exciting to me when applications are building that in.
Yeah, I think you have to have a bifurcation of where you find that audio because of kind of the nature of podcasts. And if you look at Blinkist has done a great job with putting, content in bite-sized links. and adding in all kinds of features that you wouldn't get in a podcast. And you can only do that because they have a native app that people can use, and you can add in that functionality and optimize the search for that. And we kind of take a similar approach at Alp Audio, where to have the kind of learning that we're going after, which is this in-depth, kind of rigorous learning, which is more goal-oriented, you need to have all kinds of interactive functionalities, and you need to have summaries, and you need to have flashcards, and basically a wraparound effect that you might not get in a podcast. And so you kind of have to have different user experiences.
I mean, maybe just related a little bit to what Megan was saying, something we haven't spoken about is, just smart speakers, the whole, talking about the challenges of search. More people are just asking their devices to help them learn something. And, I think that's just another really, really fascinating thing for us to think about, because it's another example of where, audio is kind of gaining primacy or gaining ground maybe on other mediums.
Yeah, I remember seeing a presentation where the guy was sort of saying that he uses, in this case, Alexa to, speak back and forth in a different language, just to kind of keep his, I think it was German, keep that nice and polished. I think this searchability thing is quite interesting, because obviously all these algorithms surface things they either want you to listen to because of any potential content agreements, and or preempting what they think you want to learn. And I suppose then it's also the challenge of how do you avoid any kind of black spots in actually I want to go beyond that and beyond that fourth wall, as it were, and learn the things that you don't know I want to know about. So it's kind of also a challenge of making sure that we are conscious about what we want to learn, and not just fed it as well.
I mean, I can follow up on that, in that I think we've been talking about how there's different ways to learn, and the role that audio can play. I think we're going to see more and more opportunities to fit learning into people's lives, right? So that's sort of what we've been talking about. And I think maybe you will take a university class, but then have a chance. Maybe you could take it online, maybe you could take it at home, maybe you take it in person, but then maybe there's a follow-up in a few months, with an audio course. That's part of that. Maybe that is broken down into a morning, 1 minute while you're brushing your teeth, inspiration of the day or something. And then maybe that's linked to something that you can play during lunch or something. And this could all maybe be spaced out over 5 years, or I think we might be building these spaces where you go to when you want a certain kind of thing. And I think we're all kind of worried about the segmentation and the consolidation of certain places and putting walls up in different places. Blinkist from the beginning has wanted to be that place where you go to hang out when you want to learn something, right? Like, I have 10 minutes, I have 50 minutes. I want to be inspired. I have a specific question. Boom, Blinkist, I know where I'm going. Now there's a lot of places that do that, right? So we've had to try to figure out different kinds of formats, different ways to do that. But what still is the case is that you'll see people that come because they've never heard of, let's say, Ryan Holiday or something, and they're interested in his work. But then you might also have somebody that's read a Malcolm Gladwell book 3 years ago and wants to freshen up on that and use Blinkist for that. And so I think we just might find that it becomes a normal part of life, that the audio experience, some things you listen to at home for this kind of learning, something you listen to on your bike with your headphones for that kind of learning. And it might just be that we all kind of grow up and become more comfortable deciding what medium, what tool, which wearable, which technology is going to fit in for what content, for which need that we have.
And do you have any sort of hopes and dreams for audio and learning, and or things that you would not want it to evolve into?
I'm a big fan of independent podcasters, and it's exciting what's happening in the world of podcasting. But as companies merge and get bigger and bigger, I hope we're not drowning out these independent voices, because just like you said about hearing the things that you didn't know you even wanted to know when you're doing a search function, we want to make sure that we have many voices out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add also outside of the Western world, right? It's not just about the big companies, but I think we're seeing really interesting audio cases in all parts of the world. I was talking to someone here from Angola, and she was saying most people listen to podcasts on WhatsApp, because they just hear something and they forward it to each other. And so they're not really going into the app, but she's saying her and her friends, when they hear something, they record it and then they just share it on WhatsApp. But things go viral, and and it's a completely different experience. And I know, the apps that are huge in China, for example, they're really interestingly different than what we're all familiar with. And I think what I hope doesn't happen is that we all sort of assume, okay, Apple is what we have and Spotify is what we have. I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can keep using, keep having access to this information. And I think we'll find lots of inspiration if we look all over the world and in new places.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, about thinking internationally. And I know in China with Himalaya, it's much more of a culture of paying for audio for learning, specifically for maybe to support your work goals as well. And I actually had someone uploading the Edtech podcast to Himalaya. I don't, it's probably out there in the ether somewhere, but it's really fascinating how it plays out in different regions.
I would like to bring up Clubhouse because that has definitely been like a recent trend no one could escape from. And what I thought was so fascinating about Clubhouse is that people were, when they produced audio content, because it was real time, they were so much more authentic and real and kind of sharing very valuable insights they would probably not do when it's on demand. And this is also kind of a direction I see audio evolving, is not only facilitating creation and not necessarily having the discussion about real time or on demand, but more importantly, like giving creators and also speakers, because like right now, for example, Sophie, you're the creator, we're the speaker, but also giving everyone more control of the content, where it ends up, and maybe also afterwards make it kind of editable. Because I think this would kind of go into the right direction of producing even more relevant content if people not always have the feeling, okay, what I'm saying in like this half an hour is ending up on the internet somewhere and I would never have control about it. Or like maybe if I say something wrong, then I don't have the chance to eliminating it afterwards. And this is, what is the charm certainly about real time, but I think this can as well be done for on-demand audio content.
I think that's super interesting. I think that it's also about creating. You don't have the ability to edit it and make it super polished, but the idea that it becomes an actual club where people rock up and share resources, I think is really interesting. I think I'm really also keen to follow what Apple and Spotify are doing with paid podcasts. And I think it was mentioned earlier about, it's interesting because they're going down the subscription route. So, you can pay and have a different form. But if you want to provide a learning course, for example, and that has a finite finish, what happens then? Because you don't want to subscribe, then drop out, then subscribe. So I think that's why at the moment you're seeing a lot of companies pop up where you can host sort of private podcasts and have a different model where you perhaps pay just for that audio content as a one-off. And I'm sure that problem won't exist for much longer. But I think how paid evolves is going to be interesting to follow.
Yeah, and maybe to jump on that, also how creators are going to make money in general. I mean, that's from the platform side, the subscription model. And obviously Blink has been a big beneficiary of the subscription model. But, what we're trying to build out with Shortcast is a way to pay podcast creators that isn't just selling ads. So we see, it's a recession and there are some, big famous people can sell ads and make good money. That's great. But I think we all know that some of the people that make the best content aren't necessarily the people with the most Twitter followers. And, we're trying to build out models and ways where we can share audience, share revenue with people who help us present content in a way that helps people learn, and I think more and more people are going to try and crack this also. And I don't know if we're definitely not the only people, but if we can help creators get more revenue by reaching more people, then we can ideally get more content out there that helps this learning sort of ecosystem thrive. And I'm interested to see what other innovations are going to happen there.
I love the point about WhatsApp as well, and such a simple idea. And I think, pretty much it's becoming a norm now to sort of have almost like a mentorship WhatsApp group. So, you have your collective brain where people that work in the same space, and you dip in and say, well, what do you think about this? And actually that goes back to Nigel's idea of, in this case, sort of public servants actually sharing, look, we did this, it seemed to work quite well. And it's those rapid ways of communicating, and in this case using audio, that are almost so easy to use. It's stupid. It's just like you don't have to think about it at all, and that's kind of what works. And I think how that intersects with audio, the peer-to-peer learning side is kind of what makes it really exciting as well. It's not the traditional purveyors of knowledge handing this down. It's like rapid, like you said, Sophie, here and then it's gone and on to the next thing, because we haven't always got time to have a qualification for 5 years. It's actually competence and then learn the next skill that will hold you in good stead for the next year. So I think that's all quite an exciting development.
Perhaps one silver lining, of this awful pandemic is, we have spent, like we are today, on Zoom, recording, and actually our audiences, learners' expectations have changed a lot during this period. I think a lot of aspiring podcasters 2 years ago would want to make everything sound like This American Life, and I'm not sure that is the case anymore. And I was just listening to those little voice memos from public servants. It's like it was fine, and I wonder if I was sort of doing in the same job 2 years ago, I'd have been like, well, we really ought to record those people a bit more professionally sounding. So actually, I think there's kind of an opportunity maybe with audio. It is a sort of a relatively low-tech medium that, we can all sort of benefit from.
Actually, I would like to jump in there because when we started Advise, or before that, actually, I did a survey with 3,000 students to kind of really determine if the audio quality is a major driver, if they would consume the content or not. And we kind of gave them 4 or 5 tracks about all kinds of topics, from history to kind of biology, and with different kind of speakers and different kinds of audio quality. And then we asked them, hey, listening to all these tracks, what could we do better? And they said, well, the audio quality could be better. But then they responded to the question, would you still listen to it for the purpose of learning something new? They all said yes. So I think this showed very much that for the purpose of learning, which is like a really strong driver, people should care much less about if they're recording in a professional podcast studio or if they have like a 500 euro mic, because technology nowadays, like our smartphones, they produce very, very high quality already. So if you're sitting in a silent room with not much background noise, I think it's doable to really produce good content if you focus more on the content than like on all the fancy things that make it more like a media production. So I totally agree on that, Nigel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to reflect on, given what's happened with MOOCs that have evolved in their own right, but then it became a bit of a bun fight for best production, going to its logical conclusion, which is something like masterclass. And so I can sort of see how this was split into two again. On the one side, the content, the learning, and on the other, where you've got consolidated tech, which may take over some of these companies, then just going This American Lifestyle, 6 producers, and so I think you'll sort of see both coexist and both have their place, and will settle down into where their sort of market fit is. But yeah, groovy. Well, I think that sort of brings us to a natural conclusion. Maybe one-liner hopes and dreams. So if we were to record this next year, where would you like to see audio and learning?
Well, for me, it's really just a complete social mobile learning experience that's as good as a university in your pocket.
Well, next year I would like to see audio competing with video when it comes to all kinds of stats, including market size, usage, and so on.
I hope creators have more chances to make money and reach wider audiences with good content, and that will mean more users have more access to great content and be exposed to more creators outside of what they're used to, let's say. New perspectives.
Oh, it's such a hard question. And everybody else has said really good answers. I suppose for me, I think it's interesting to compare how kind of like the evolution of video in learning and how that kind of originally kind of aped, let's just record a lecture. And we evolved from that. And I think we're sort of still maybe at the kind of the audio version of like, what is the thing we're trying to copy rather than what actually makes learning in audio something unique.
And mine isn't so deep. I just hope people continue to fund the research about audio so we can understand how people are using it.
It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you all so much. It's obviously a subject close to my heart, so I've really enjoyed learning from you all and can't wait to share this with our listeners who are obviously also enthusiastic about this subject. So thanks so much, and perhaps we should meet again next year and see where we've got to. But yeah, thank you all, and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, great to meet everybody.
So that's all for this week. Thank you to all my guests this week, to all the listings, for you also for all listening in. We love putting the show together and putting it out to you, and hopefully providing some resources for you all, and love getting your messages, and just wish I could clone myself into 1,000 people to get back to you all, but fear not. Quite often your messages are read even if they're not returned. Anyhow, I'll be back on Clubhouse midweek to reel off the best resources from the show as well. Our EdTech of the Week this week is a project from the Netherlands called Making.com, which is an online platform that simplifies the connection between people looking for production technology and suppliers that offer it. So it's the first platform to group technologies around the products they help make, allowing creators of all sizes access to the hidden network of machines, manufacturers, tooling suppliers, and therefore the knowledge previously accessible only through long-established private networks. So if you're a maker type enthusiast, you might want to go and see what they're up to and how the digital, physical and creative realms are coming together. Okay, so that is Making.com. Our next episode is looking at what happened to EdTech in China. So a really interesting fallout from newly introduced regulation there. And so until then, adios, have fun, work hard and keep on listening and learning. Take care. Bye-bye.